Hi. Well, it's well and truly summer again. Uh, Yesterday, the forecast was for 102. That would feel like it was 117. I tell you, it didn't get quite that hot, but it knows how to get hot and stay hot in Arkansas. And it eats up the moisture and everything pretty quickly too. So we need those thunderstorms, which before we were getting too much of and now not enough. Go figure. Okay, this time what brings me is inspiration. And I've done something new yet again. I was going over my last video. I have learned once I get them uploaded to listen, just in case the whatever YouTube or whatever website does changes something. So in the listening, all kinds of inspiration was popping up. So I took notes, and I think I've done this one other time maybe, where I just put some ideas on paper. And I've seen other people do it and do a good job with it. Daniel, MTO Grace, is good that way. Often what he covers has sufficient depth and range that it's a good idea to, marshal your thoughts and collect them. And so we'll see what happens. Uh, I just took them down as they arose, and I've got maybe a dozen lines here. And then when I tried to do some rearranging, and it didn't, the piece I was trying to move didn't fit anywhere but where it was. So we shall see. Now, I say things a lot of times and then I go on. And I don't explain a lot. And I'm not much into explanation, but I want to fill out somewhat on anything is possible. I say that a lot. And I talk about being empty and making friends with not knowing. Now, for someone who went the well-educated route, if in today's centuries we can call this well-educated, I mean, I've got some college degrees. I do think that the college degrees gotten back in Europe in earlier centuries were better in a lot of ways. Maybe not around science, but around language and philosophy, ethics, understanding. Anyway, I'm just going on and on. Okay, so with anything is possible, it's a way of saying, what am I open to? If anything is possible, that means I'm consciously taking down limits and structures, which means beliefs. If someone says something and I want to respond negatively, do I look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, and open up and try to see it differently? Just because I might disagree with something, I'm finding that flexible perspective, being able to move and shift one's perspective, is very handy. And often it also means that something can be seen as truth from one perspective, but even that doesn't limit us, because there are different ways to see things where the things can actually mean something different and even contradictory to the truth that we've seen. And so by accepting an attitude that anything is possible, I find it really useful and functional in helping me step out of a lot of boxes and understand others' perspectives. That doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to carry on a conversation or communication with someone, especially when someone has a very fixed perspective and lives in the mind, because there's the tendency there to be rigid and to think that your belief is correct. And you have all these really great reasons. And you know, from that perspective, your belief is correct. It's just that you're limiting yourself because there are other possibilities as well. Thus, my preference for anything is possible and throwing it wide open. Okay, so what are you open to? What are you willing to consider? Now, truth, and speaking on truth, I did some in my last video. I want to say that is too big a subject to be contained in one video or even a dozen. And to me, it's something really, really sacred, kind of like the 999. There's just a certain sacredness there that I have a reverence for it. And I tend to shy away from I don't know what to say here. Okay, so making friends with not knowing. Have you done that? That's one of the things. The mind likes to know, and it's not comfortable with not knowing. And so if you haven't made friends with not knowing, if you aren't comfortable sitting in that emptiness of just being open and willing to know nothing, willing to know that anything is possible and chances are really good that you don't know it all, so therefore, you know, something new could be gained. It's a good indication you're in heart if you've made friends with not knowing and found a comfort in it, because mind won't take you there. All right, so that's one thing I wanted to share. Now, there's a blog I like to follow with a certain amusement, but I follow it, and it's Lauren Gorgo. I think that's how it's said. And so often I find she says kind of way out in different things, but they so resonate with right where I am and with what I'm going through. So it's like she's finding often a radically different perspective, and yet at the heart of what she's saying, it works for me because I'm saying the same thing, only clothing it in different words. Something that she has been saying for a while, and she communes with or channels different groups of Pleiadians, from what I've seen so far, maybe more, I don't know, is that they're saying we're moving from causality to resonance. The whole way, style, standard of being and living has been based on causality. This causes a that. You've got time. You've got cause and effect. You've got good karma and bad karma. You've got what goes around comes around. That's causality at its most basic. Now, resonance is different. To stick with and only accept a world where causality rules is to limit yourself, because in that world, things often take time, such as growth or healing, development, that kind of thing. Now, also in my last video, I was talking about how the young people today, and okay, look, I'm pushing 60 here, so young to me is anything up to about 30 right now. But mostly 20-somethings and below, even our little children, are able to leapfrog the whole way we grew up and learned and developed, which was linear. You know, you go through the grades in order. You got to do the fourth grade before you can do the 12th grade, right? And that made sense and that worked. And so there's a truth to it, right? Small t. Now, if you're looking at it in terms of resonance, and be open to anything is possible, identity is at the heart of everything. There's nothing that I can say to you here that identity isn't going to play a part in. If you think you're the body or the mind or just this lifetime, you're not tracking with me, or you're not going to hear it like it's being said. So with resonance, we could have the youth plugging in to previous lifetimes, other lifetimes, future lifetimes. All time is now. Okay? We could have them resonating with and thus pulling in or magnetizing their own higher dimensional self, their own broader perspective, wider experience and knowledge. And so there wouldn't be the need for the linear steps to get from point A to point B. They would just resonate with that. All right. Now, I've been seeing this and saying this in my own way, but Gorgo really comes right out and says that according to those that she communes with, mankind, those that are taking this trek, it's a free will trek. If you're going up the spiral of spirit, you're having a different experience of life than if that's not your concern. You know, you might be going off into the spiral of technology. You might be going down the spiral of spirit if you're on the dark side and you're into manipulation and power control. So if you're choosing this, what's available now, according to Lauren, is that we have been basically unplugged from the whole causality mode of being. I think they call it human 2.0. You know, 1.0 was the original issue. And 2.0, they're saying now we're more of a cosmic being and we've been plugged in differently. And so the rules are different, everything's changed. And I thought I'd throw that out there. I mean, it's not the way that I say things, but, you know, it has a resonance for me. See if it does for you. It's certainly fun to play with. Again, anything is possible. Okay, now what's in my notes here? Yeah, the causality, I'm all the time saying all time is now. There are subatomic particles whose whole business in life is to go backwards in time, and that's what they do in the particle accelerators, you know, and the physicists. I guess particle physicists could speak intelligently of this. I just know that it exists. And so time is another structure that we've bought into, that it works a certain way. We've been given this Gregorian calendar, and it's been made very mechanical for us. Well, we can step completely up and out of that. And the Mayan calendar has been a help because it's not based mechanically on revolutions of a sun, you know, and planet around a sun and that kind of thing. It's different. And maybe the revolutions are just bigger. I don't know. It's all cycles. But anyway, time isn't what we think it is. Right now, we're going through all of our lifetimes. There's one way to look at it. There's also, just in this lifetime, there's all the different timelines, or if you will, parallel universes, where you made this and that different decision, and so on that timeline you went off in a different direction and you have a different life. So there's all kinds of possibilities here if you're open to anything being possible, right? So we're stepping out of identification with time, with a certain body, a certain consciousness, which is time and space. And so one thing I either, now, sometimes I do things in meditations, and I don't know if I've shared them here or not. So if I've shared this before, apologies. But on who am I don't have an answer. I don't know that I ever will. But I do, I have done some meditation. How do I put words around this? Jeez. I have a better sense. Because in seeking who and what am I, and in realizing, okay, number one, I have a lot of lifetimes. I know that. I've experienced being in some of the other ones for moments here and there. And that's just as real as this is. I mean, I know that exists. And so there's all those lifetimes that are now. I know I have a self that has a fullness of identity, awareness, and a life on higher dimensions. I've encountered that. Rarely, but I've encountered it. And so there I am trekking across time and space in the bodies, trekking across spirit and matter in the dimensions or densities. And then you want to look too at timelines. I love the Anelia Benz interview by Bill Ryan. The way she deals with timelines, it just works for me. I've always suspected that of being the way of it, like a decision tree. You know, you start out with one branch, and then at this point you get to make a choice, and you can go either direction if it's a yes no choice, you know, and then at the end of this you go and it just branches out. I've even wondered if the tree of life might not be something like that. You see all the branching. And so Anelia talks about skipping across timelines, communing with the other Teresas that made different decisions and so have a different life, and learning and growing and expanding from that. After all, I am that in a very real and personal way. So you get to looking in the midst of all of this, and it can get pretty wild and wacky, a lot worse than just 3D chess, you know, trying to pull it together. And so I began looking to say, what does it all have in common? And in a way, I don't even know about the soul, because I would like to think that each being that I am that has its own complete life sort of like has a soul, an essence, an identity there. So I can't say even that the soul it has in common, because what about those lifetimes where I'm taking a walk on the dark side? Well, isn't that a different soul energy than this one? And so it doesn't have that in common. So you have to go up higher. What does it have in common? And my understanding, and I'm just trying to put words to something, don't get stuck in the words, is what I would call the I am-ness, the I am presence, the divine monad, that which came from source into creation, into time and space, I would say is almost like the big spherical unicity, the oneness, that ties it all together. And it's almost as if each lifetime is a ray sent forth from that. And so I have to travel up to that level, which is divine, in order to find that which pulls it all together. Because I'm very aware of being in the midst and in the process of integrating across all of that. All of time, all of space, all of embodiments, all of dimensions, all of densities, all of everything. Whether in this or that universe or some other one where free will's not an option, whether in human bodies or reptilians or felines or praying mantises or incarnating a cloud or a symbol or a mountain or anything's possible. Now, don't believe any more than what's been said here. I'm not saying that I subscribe to the concept of reincarnation where you can next time around be a dog or a bug or something. All right, I'm not going there. I don't go for that. And it's all true all at once also, because all time is now. And apologies if this has been a little overwhelming. It's fun for me. It's finally finding not an ultimate purpose, but a very sufficient purpose for my now, which is this integration across all time, space, dimensions, densities, incarnations, whatever, whatever and wherever anything that has any of my energy in it or on it has manifested. I want full access to that. If that's me, I want to own it. I want to be able to explore it. I want to be whole again. I think we're all driven to seek this wholeness, and it's a thing more of spirit. It's certainly not a thing of flesh. And so that's kind of where I am with that. And what I'm finding is that being in 3D, having this manifestation here, while linking up with that, with higher consciousness, it just isn't what we thought higher consciousness would be. It's always so different that it's really easier and easier to give up all expectations, all beliefs, all ideas about what we think enlightenment or awakening or higher consciousness is or will be like. Because I'm so constantly surprised that expectations, that's a lower thing. That's back in time, because expectations are of the quote-unquote future. And there's really no such thing. So that's playing around in lower dimensions than what we have access to. And if we can abandon expectations and enter the void or the emptiness of not knowing, that's where you can dance this dance and play. And the dance is one of balance, seeking balance. So in not knowing, it's a dance with knowing and not knowing. Knowing when to lead, when to follow, when to be led. Knowing when to speak up, when to be quiet. It's a real balance that's called for. Because identity isn't what we thought. It isn't what we think it is. We have to get out of thinking entirely to find this higher identity. So the tricky balance, too, is working with what is known and what is unknown. Because there are things that will be known and understood, and you recognize and realize from this perspective, here's a truth, small t, that works. It's totally functional, it's useful, it's great. And it's like those beliefs about what the lines in the middle of the road mean. It's a really good idea that we all agree on that and don't get too flaky with it, or we'll be driving on the wrong side and not so hot. So the known and the unknown also, when we're in this emptiness, we will, how do I say this? Daniel? We will have, it's not that you have knowings delivered to you, because there's not a you like that. And it's not that you enter into knowings, because there's not a you like that. Knowings exist in the isness, There are knowings that when they're experienced, they have such a depth and a flavor or a character that you realize that you know that more firmly and fully than you know your own name. Your own name is more likely to be untrue than that would be. And that's something that has to be experienced to make any sense, because I know it sounds wild, but there's that. Then there's also the balance, again, all of there's a thread tying a lot of this together, which is balance, seeking a balance of being the fish versus the water. Now, I'm fond of what Anelia has to say, and I think it was Shifting Dimensions might have been the one short little entry in her blog where she said that enlightenment is like being the fish in the water, and the water is the light. Whereas oneness is knowing that you're the water and that you contain the fish. Well, I like that. I like that a lot. And you see, there is a real reality and a beauty and an integrity and a beautiful worth in both of them. They're both true. They're both beautiful. They're both useful, functional, and it's not even that one's better than the other. Wherever you are at the time, that's best. Whatever your heart drives for the hardest, that's best. And it might be one now and the other later, vice versa. You know, there's just, at these levels of being, if you will, there's just not a right and a wrongness. There's a what is. And it's all beautiful. And so there's an opening up to that. Again, the chime, please, dong, anything is possible, you know? All right. And then, additionally, there's the balance of independence versus assistance. And so I've really been seeking that balance powerfully of late. For a good while, I chased away everybody, my guides and everybody else. I told them all, I'm not willing to communicate, leave me alone. And I went within. And I was determined to stand in my divinity, to stand in my higher self, and that was going to be sufficient. I mean, if that's God, that's got to be enough. Everything else has just got to be details or stories or whatever. If God isn't sufficient, there's a problem. And our own divinity is God. But then, you know, seasons and cycles, right? And so now I find myself suddenly very willing to begin again and to begin working with higher intelligence. I'm not saying I'm taking dictations or channeling or doing that kind of thing. Just acknowledging their presence and inviting them in at times and requesting support. So, yeah, don't put more than what I say in these words. Don't make assumptions. If you don't know, let's do it in the comments or messages. All right. I find, finally, that in my last video I shared a link for Thunderbolts of the Gods. And this is a wonderful crack open the shell of mind and look again at the science, the mother of all sciences, or the fundamental, the basic science, which is cosmology. And let's give it a new look, a really new look, big perspective change. I love that stuff. Okay, so there's that. Previously, you've heard me speak and give links for Nassim Haramein, and he does the same with physics. And he turns physics on its ear, because what he does is he takes some of the absolute fundamental underlying principles. What are dimensions? What is a point? You know, that kind of thing. How do things work? And he puts it together very, very differently. And if you work at the foundation, and if you shift the foundation, the whole building has to come down and be structured again or be something different. I mean, that's just so. Haramain can also give you the cracking open the shell of everything you thought you knew and believed, to have a look at everything's possible, anything's possible. Could this be? That's how I watch these things. Could this be? And then I follow where I'm led from within, as far as how I dance with that. And then finally, Anelia Benz gives us a whole new look. Now, there are some that have no use for her, and I want to say, just like she said in her video, that's fine. If she doesn't work for you, I wouldn't waste any time slamming or condemning her. Just leave it alone. It's useful for other folks, and different strokes for different folks. All the birds don't sing the same tune. Let's leave it alone. But anyway, with Anelia, she gives a whole new perspective on what might life be like if you hadn't ever had another incarnation, if you hadn't ever been toyed and messed with the dark force, if you hadn't been through hell and heaven, you know, millions upon millions of embodiments, and all of that, if you just came straight in from spirit into this lifetime. Well, that perspective is fresh. So there's another way to crack open the shell of beliefs, thoughts, ideas, attitudes of how we look at life. And I love it. And maybe even less will be open to what Hidden Hand had to say, because that is a text file that I have given a link for. And I'll go back and I'll put these links in again with this journal. But the Hidden Hand is actually one of the fairly high up the feeding chain, or down the feeding chain, one of the dark ones, speaking from that perspective of what's it like to be a bad guy, and what are they trying to accomplish, where are they coming from, what are their goals, what are their beliefs, ideas, attitudes. For me, although I'm not doing that this time around in this life, you know, walking on the dark side, for me, that seems to resonate. I find a certain element of truth in that. So I wouldn't completely trust anyone about things, but there are things that are said in the Hidden Hand text that really ring for me, that again, the chime please, anything's possible if we can go into things, get out of the head, get into the heart, ring that anything's possible chime before we get into such things. Oh my God, the journey will be so magnificent. It will be so much different. All we've had up to now is taking these trips in the head, and that's too limited. Like Gorgo and the Pleiadians say, this is human being 2.0. It's human divine. Divine humanity, something. So there's that. And I'm going to give you something else that speaks of the darkness and that perspective. And it's called Code to the Matrix. It's a link someone sent me. And I found it very useful. It's not often that I will download something that's hundreds of pages and actually read it. I don't read anymore, so it's really good. And as if I haven't covered enough, I'm going to touch on one more thing, and that's technology versus biology. There have been a few comments of late where people, especially people with a good, solid respect for science and technology and higher education and learning and growth and development and the unlimitedness of that, think I'm out there. because I see that. Like I say, I have several college degrees. It's not like I can't relate to that, but to me, that's a lower way, because that's working with the mind. And as magnificent as the mind is, and it is, it's truly grand and wonderful. And I do enjoy the new technology. I'm using a webcam, I'm using the internet. I mean, this is techno. But I am in spirit when I say that spirit has no need of that. With our biology, we don't need the internet, we don't need telephones, we don't need any of it. We've gotten used to all of these things. That doesn't mean we need them. We've been convinced that we're weak, worthless, and nothing without our tools. We can't even remember a shopping list. We're so used to writing things down. Ancient peoples that didn't have a written language were much more functional with the mind and the use of it. We don't have to do that anymore, so we don't. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it gets lazy, it gets flabby. So I just wanted to give the flavor of that, not go off into it too much. I think it could be a video by itself. So have a great day. Hope this wasn't too much to try to accomplish in one vid. There are different ways to see things where the things can actually mean something different and even contradictory to the truth that we've seen. And so by accepting an attitude that anything is possible, I find it really useful and functional in helping me step out of a lot of boxes and understand others' perspectives. That doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to carry on a conversation or communication with someone, especially when someone has a very fixed perspective and lives in the mind, because there's the tendency there to be rigid and to think that your belief is correct. And you have all these really great reasons. And you know, from that perspective, your belief is correct. It's just that you're limiting yourself because there are other possibilities as well. Hi. Well, it's well and truly summer again. Yesterday, the forecast was for 102. That would feel like it was 117. I tell you, it didn't get quite that hot, but it knows how to get hot and stay hot in Arkansas. And it eats up the moisture and everything pretty quickly too, so we need those thunderstorms, which before we were getting too much of and now not enough. Go figure. Okay, this time what brings me is inspiration, and I've done something new yet again. I was going over my last video. I have learned, once I get them uploaded, to listen, just in case the whatever YouTube or whatever website does a lot. And I'm not much into explanation, but I want to fill out somewhat on anything is possible. I say that a lot, and I talk about being empty and making friends with not knowing. Now, for someone who went the well-educated route, if in today's centuries we can call this well-educated, I mean, I've got some college degrees. I do think that the college degrees gotten back in Europe in earlier centuries were better in a lot of ways. Maybe not around science, but around language and philosophy, ethics, understanding. Anyway, I'm just going on and on. Okay, so with anything is possible, it's a way of saying, what am I open to? if anything is possible, that means I'm consciously taking down limits and structures, which means beliefs. If someone says something and I want to respond negatively, do I look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, and open up and try to see it differently? Just because I might disagree with something, I'm finding that flexible perspective, being able to move and shift one's perspective, is very handy. And often it also means that something can be seen as truth from one perspective, but even that doesn't limit us because there changes something. So in the listening, all kinds of inspiration was popping up. So I took notes, and I think I've done this one other time maybe, where I just put some ideas on paper. And I've seen other people do it and do a good job with it. Daniel, MTO Grace, is good that way. Often what he covers has sufficient depth and range that it's a good idea to, marshal your thoughts and collect them. And so we'll see what happens. I just took them down as they arose, and I've got maybe a dozen lines here. And then when I tried to do some rearranging, and it didn't, the piece I was trying to move didn't fit anywhere but where it was. So we shall see. Now, I say things a lot of times and then I go on, and I don't explain